For the first time in American history, an entire state has ordered the data center industry to stop and wait. New York's freeze lands the same week 200 Texans beat back a $34 billion tax break. 4 local governments slam the door in a single night, and a nationwide day of protest gears up for Saturday. The backlash isn't coming anymore. It's here. We begin in Albany, where Governor Kathy Hochul just did something no governor has done before. She signed an executive order making New York the first state in the nation to halt new data centers. The order pauses state environmental permits for up to 1 year for any new or expanded facility, drawing 50 megawatts or more, carefully exempting the smaller server rooms that hospitals, schools and banks depend on, while freezing an estimated $10 billion of hyperscale development. Hochul was blunt about her reasoning, saying data centers drive up costs for local ratepayers, and she refuses to let those costs get passed down to New Yorkers. The state will now write a statewide environmental review framework covering energy demand, water use and air quality. And until that framework is finished, the biggest projects in New York simply wait. New York acted from the governor's mansion. In rural Texas, the pushback came from folding chairs in a county annex. More than 200 residents packed Leon County's Annex 2 building as commissioners took up a tax abatement request from Crusoe Technologies, the company behind a proposed $34 billion data center campus planned to be operational by 2028. Commissioners rejected the initial application, citing an incomplete submission, a procedural answer, but the room treated it like a victory. Resident Kat Wall told the court it was unfair for a heavily funded company to chase a special tax deal ordinary citizens could never get, while neighbors James McCausland and Donna Hull said the community broadly opposes the project and the reinvestment zone carved out of farmland. Crusoe is expected to refile. Residents aren't waiting. They've called their own public hearing for July 27 in Marquez and invited the commissioners to attend. That kind of local anger is about to get a national stage. This Saturday, July 18, a group called Humans First has organized a nationwide day of protest against what it calls the unchecked and unwanted expansion of AI data centers. More than 50 demonstrations across 22 states. Texas, which now leads the country in data center development, hosts 11 rallies on its own, with more planned in Georgia, California, Florida and Virginia. Notably, this movement is organized from the political right, pitching itself as a voice for grassroots Americans against backroom deals. And it points to a Gallup poll showing 70% of Americans don't want a data center in their community. Researchers tracking the backlash say active opposition groups have more than doubled this year, from under 400 to more than 800 across 49 states. Saturday will test just how big this movement has become. And even before the first protest sign goes up, local governments are racing ahead of their own voters. In roughly 24 hours, 4 of them froze data center development. St. Charles County, Missouri passed a 6-month moratorium unanimously after residents packed the council chamber. One speaker warning that the digital world cannot come at the expense of the physical one. In Lawrence, Kansas, commissioners were asked for a 12-month pause and doubled it to 24, with opponents spilling out of the commission room. Marietta, Georgia tabled a contested rezoning at Powers Ferry Place to cheers from the gallery, then froze all new data center projects through December 31 in Herring Township. Michigan, trustees approved a 6-month pause even after attorneys warned that state law forbids an outright ban. Add St. Joseph, Missouri and Valparaiso, Indiana taking their own first steps the same night, and the pattern is unmistakable. The reason for all this resistance shows up in one place. The power bill. PJM interconnection. The grid operator serving 67 million people across 13 states and Washington, D.C., announced the results of its latest capacity auction. And for the second straight year, costs tied a record $16.4 billion. The independent market monitor says data centers alone account for roughly $6.3 billion. Of that, about 40% of the total. Prices slammed into the $325 per megawatt day cap yet again, meaning only a government-imposed ceiling kept the number from climbing higher. And here's the most alarming part. Even at record prices, the auction came up 6,831 megawatts short of PJM's 1 in 10-year reliability standard. America's biggest grid paid record money and still couldn't buy enough power to meet its own target. Electricity is only half the fight. In South Florida, it's water and noise. Palm Beach County commissioners take a final vote this week on Project Tango, a proposed AI data center in Loxahatchee that developers want to expand from 1 million to 1.5 million square feet. The county's zoning board has already recommended denial. Unanimously, developer PBA Holdings insists the fears are overblown. Project manager Ernie Cox says the buildings and cooling equipment have been moved half a mile from Saddleview Elementary School in the Arden community, and that a closed-loop cooling system would sip just 5,000 gallons of water a day, a fraction of the 500,000 gallons Arden's homes use. Residents aren't convinced, and officials are preparing overflow rooms for the crowds. If commissioners approve it anyway, ground breaks in early 2027, with completion not expected until 2033. Yet despite all of that resistance, the building boom keeps reaching deeper into rural America. QTS and power developer Lancium announced a data center campus in Halt County, Texas, expected to bring more than $10 billion in capital investment to a panhandle county of fewer than 3,000 people. The site, known as Lancium's Turkey Clean Campus, is designed around dedicated renewable heavy power, part of Lancium's plan for 5 gigawatt-scale campuses across West Texas by 2028. QTS, owned by Blackstone, is one of the largest data center developers in the country, and Blackstone has separately pumped $500 million into Lancium itself. For a county whose seat, Memphis, Texas, counts barely 2,000 residents, the announcement is staggering, and it lands in the very state bracing for 11 separate data center protests this Saturday. And the money fueling all of this keeps flowing. Our kicker, AI startup Reflection just signed a compute deal worth more than $1 billion with Nebius, the cloud provider building out AI capacity across the United States. The agreement runs through 2029 and gives Reflection access to clusters built on NVIDIA's newest GB300 chips. Reflection was founded by 2 former Google DeepMind researchers and develops open-source models, positioned as alternatives to OpenAI and Anthropic. And this is its second major infrastructure grab in weeks, following a June computing agreement with SpaceX. Nebius shares jumped on the announcement. Think about that. $1 billion for chips and power. From a startup most Americans have never heard of. That's the scale of demand crashing into the resistance you've seen tonight. The money isn't slowing down, and neither are the communities standing in its way. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment. It helps us cover more of these stories.